everyone, my name is Juliet Kilgore and I'm going to be presenting on Silence by Lucia Berlin. I want to touch on some of the key craft elements that Berlin used in Silence to make it such an effective and successful short story. The first of those that I want to talk about is going to be diction. Diction immediately stands out when you begin to read Silence. There are examples from it that I'm going to share quickly. From the first page, for example. The first of these that I want to share is an excerpt from a small sentence, the second sentence actually, of the whole short story. The beginning of it says, "I'd find me a tree." This is on page 188 of our short story collection. And the difference here between using me instead of myself is an important distinction because it almost hints at a kind of dialect, really, and that we can see the character is coming from a location where they might say me instead of myself when speaking that way, and in that way we can begin in the second sentence of this short story to hear how this character sounds and see how the diction impacts the voice of the story. Another example from page 190 this time is, "Home was bad and school was bad." Bad here doesn't fully exhibit to readers the extent of how home and school was for the main character, but it doesn't need to because the story has already done that with scene to build that up. This is more of a conclusion of that segment. The use of bad here is perfect because it's informal and that helps to build the diction, which helps to build the voice, and that is casual, informal, trustworthy, and credible. So we really attach ourselves to the character in the story. We are able to be immersed. Berlin also uses the word wacko on page 191, which may seem like a small detail, but it makes such a key difference for that word to be used by the narrator of wacko rather than this disturbed individual. If the main character had said something along those lines instead of what she did say of wacko, we would be taken out of immersion. Why did she say it that way? You know, it doesn't fit her character. And because we know that we can say that, it can be said that by this point at page 191, where we're still at the beginning of the short story, Berlin has already solidly formed a voice around the character through the use of diction. The next craft element in which I would like to discuss is going to be point of view, which influences both voice and characterization. Silence is written from a first-person perspective. This means that we only have access to the main character's inner thoughts. That access is important for understanding how the main character is interpreting her life as it happens to her and as she looks back at it. And additionally, our lack of access to the inner thoughts of other characters is just as important because it makes us feel this connection with the main character even though we don't see her name and we don't know her exact age when these events are happening. We can guesstimate that she was definitely younger at the time, but just because we're seeing from that first person perspective with her, we really feel like we're outed with the character. When she's not speaking, we feel that we can't speak as well. On a different note, when our main character goes through that horrific experience with her grandfather towards the end of the story, we feel that we're there with her and it makes it all the worse, which really means that Berlin did a great job of implementing that. Seeing from the first person perspective also gives us the chance to see how the narrator interprets other characters, such as her mother, the librarian, her Uncle John, which leads us to discussing examples of characterization within the short story. For instance, when we first meet Hope, a pivotal character in the progression of the story, we really get a powerful description of her. And because her description is interpreted and then relayed by the narrator, it doesn't feel out of place. It's so easy to just describe a character and not relay that through the eyes of the narrator. But in the instance, we can really see how having that information of her character, of Hope's character, interpreted and then relayed to us through the eyes of the narrator in that first person perspective makes it feel in place and necessary rather than out of place and taking us out of the immersion. And I'm going to read the quote for you now. This is from around the bottom of page 190. "I played jacks on the concrete above the steps, wishing that the Syrian kid next door would ask me over. She played on their concrete porch. She was small and thin but seemed old, not grown up or mature, but like an old woman child. Long, shiny black hair with bangs hanging down over her eyes. In order to see, she had to tip her head back. She looked like a baby baboon. In a nice way, I mean. A little face and huge black eyes. All of the 6 Haddad kids looked emaciated, but the adults were huge, 200 or 300 pounds. And we also see Berlin separate the narrator's life from Hope's through the characterization of their 2 mothers. That's on page 192 when they're accused of stealing the popsicles from the delivery man. Because of that moment, we're really able to see how our main character, the narrator, wishes her mom would behave towards her. And that's really important to the characterization of the narrator, especially when we realize that the story is relaying the experience of her childhood, really, and showing readers how that shaped her into the character that she is at the end of the story when we come back to present day. Something else that isn't a craft element I can put a name to, but I noticed and thought would be interesting to discuss and point out, is how Berlin will use sets of 2 sentences, with one as an introduction to her idea and the second as confirmation of that, to put a point across rather than putting it all into one longer sentence. Page 188. I still had all of the above problems, but now I was also dressed like a ragamuffin. I lived in the slums and there was something particularly unacceptable about my hair. That could have been one sentence. It would have been lengthy, but the information there could have been presented in one to get the point across. However, the fact that Berlin separated it into 2 gave her the opportunity to provide more detail, that significant detail that we learned about, which really makes it credible. And because it's credible, we're immersed and we're interested in the character and we really feel like we're there with her throughout the story. Something else that I really thought would be important to touch on is the importance of names in the story. Our main character is not named. I mean, of course she'll have one, but we as readers don't hear it. Whereas Hope, her name is Hope. When we first meet her, the character is meeting hope itself for her life, and this really stands out in one particular quotation that then ties into the end of the story as well, and I'll read that to you now. I have never had a friend again like Hope, my onlyest true friend. I gradually became a part of the Haddad family. I believe that if this had not happened, I would have grown up to be not just neurotic, alcoholic, and insecure, but seriously disturbed. Wacko. We can see here how Hope, the character, but also the concept, are directly impacting our main character's life. Hope changed her. She found hope. And so then when we lose hope later, we really worry about the character and how she'll turn out, especially after reading that quote that we just did. So I just thought that was super interesting. And with that, let's get into the discussion for this. The question that I have for everyone is, did you see the ending coming? And how do you think the story would be changed if it had not ended the way it did? What if our narrator did not turn out to be an alcoholic? How would the story have changed? How would the credibility of the story change? And my writing exercise for you is to write a scene or a set of scenes in which a character explains the events that led to the person they are now, and then reveal that person in one concluding sentence. Thank you so much for tagging along with me for this awesome story. I hope that you enjoyed reading it, and I hope that you enjoy discussing it. Thanks so much. Bye.